Hello out there once again in podcast land, and welcome to episode 35 of the 240p Club.
It seems like it's a good number, 35.
Yeah, it was Steve Mason's jersey number.
There you go. Recently departed from the Philadelphia Flyers, who Nikki basically spent an entire Flyers game staring at his ass.
I did not!
You did.
I did not. How can I spend the entire game when there's one half of him on the other side of the ice?
Ah.
Ha!
Okay.
In your face. And you're the hockey guy, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't think of it that way.
He was too busy listening to the organ music.
Yeah.
Yeah, too busy listening to that 8-bit.
Yeah, that 8-bit sounds. Yes, actually, that is our topic today. We've talked about some of our favorite video games. We've talked about some of our favorite video games in various genres. We've gone into many top 10 lists over the years here at 240p Club, but we've never actually covered our favorite video game soundtracks. Now, to make this completely fair, we had to separate this between 8-bit, 16-bit. So this is just an 8-bit portion of the podcast. Now, when we say 8-bit, we're separating it mainly into NES, but there are a few Game Boy titles on this list, and there's also a few Sega Master System titles on this list. Good old 8-bit. You can say Game Gear as well, but I don't think any Game Gear titles have made it to this. We were going to do a top 10, actually. We were just discussing this right before we hit play on our wonderful recorder here. We were going to do a top 10, but our soundtrack lists have been so varied, and it would be pretty unfair for us to just highlight 10. So what we're going to do is just talk about various video game levels on our list that we thoroughly enjoyed, various sound effects, I should say, not just level design. The NES 8-bit, some of the soundtracks on that stuck with us for the rest of our lives. Like, since the system debuted, a lot of these musics are still in our head. It didn't matter it was an inferior technology, quote-unquote, these days. There's nothing more charming than an 8-bit soundtrack done right.
Even nowadays, we're still finding examples of it we had never heard before, like from obscure games or whatnot.
Exactly. Ray actually introduced me to Lagrange Point, which is a Japanese-only title.
The honorable mention here, because it uses an advanced sound chip, which is so advanced that I consider it like 16-bit. It's on par with Sega Genesis music, pretty much.
It's something that couldn't be replicated in the United States, because this game is strictly Famicom.
The Famicom had like 2 or something extra pins that connected to an expansion port or something that was like in the game pack. That allowed for the use of like sound expansion chips and the like.
One of the most famous ones is the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 has way better music than the NES version.
Mm-hmm. And all Famicom Disk System games had an extra sound channel as well.
You know, I didn't really notice it between Doki Doki Panic and Super Mario 2. Like, the sound effects are entirely the same, even though one was a disc system game.
If you play other games, like Metroid and Legend of Zelda were originally released for the Famicom Disk System, Metroid's music sounds almost completely different. Like, when you first start the game, the little jingle that plays sounds a lot closer to the jingle, its equivalent from Super Metroid.
Oh, nice.
And Legend of Zelda didn't have like the digitized sounds for the monsters. Instead, it used the extra voice channel to create that effect.
Oh, that's cool. And plus, you can use the microphone in the Japanese version for a quite interesting way to kill those Pols voice, the little blob things with cat ears. Mm-hmm. Which is really cool. So anyway, we're going to try to stick to the American NES, the Sega Master System, Game Boy, because it would just be unfair to put Lagrange Point on here, Castlevania 3's Japanese version on here. You know, we have to judge it mainly on American standards, which are lower, unfortunately, than Japanese standards right now.
Well, in the case of Castlevania 3, I would say the conversion was very well done. I mean, you have the same basic songs, they're just using the original NES channels instead of the extra channels.
Yeah, that's a really good starting point. That was actually on all of our lists, Castlevania 3. Mm-hmm. That was on every one of our lists, so that's a good starting point. Castlevania 3 was released in 1990 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was the sequel to, the true sequel to the first Castlevania game, as Castlevania 2 was something completely different. It played just like it, however, the level design was completely different. Obviously, the soundtrack was different, and most importantly, you had the assistance of 3 helper spirits who you could switch to anytime. They had their own abilities in the game, and in the case of Sypha, her own, or his own, depending on which canon you're using, weapons.
Not to mention, there was also Grant the Thief, who was completely broken in the Japanese version. He would just throw daggers. In the North American version, it was toned down to just stabbing with a dagger. So our version was actually a bit harder than the Japanese version.
It definitely was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been quite some time since I played that, but I try to at least play one Castlevania game during the Halloween season to get myself in the mood.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah.
We also played a few during, right before Castlevania the anime premiered, which is getting a renewal on Netflix. So, if you have a Netflix subscription, check out the first 4 episodes, and then towards the end of this year, you will see, I believe as they said, 6 or 8 more. Mm-hmm. So, that's something to definitely look forward to.
It reminds me again that I've been hearing for years everyone rave about how great Aria of Sorrow is, and I still have yet to play that. I wanted to play the other 2 for Game Boy Advance first. I've only made it through Circle of the Moon, so that's definitely something I'll be doing this summer.
I've only really cracked the boundaries of Circle of the Moon. The only post-Symphony of the Night Castlevania I think I've played is Portrait of Ruin for the DS, which is a decent game, but it's really hard. There was a lot in that game that was extremely hard.
Yeah, Circle of the Moon had a very unfair final boss fight. You basically had to exploit the card system in order to get an upper hand.
Anyway, what else do we have on our wonderful list here? The bottom of my list, which was the 10th place, was Double Dragon. I put Double Dragon on there because the NES soundtrack, I don't know, this is just me personally. I like the NES soundtrack. I know it was vastly inferior to the arcade port, but the soundtrack on the NES version was really good. It was reused for one level in River City Ransom. That was a surprise. That we've played through River City Ransom on Twitch, so you can look that part up if you want to.
Big old password system too.
Oh, they had that arcade password system
in
River City. But yeah, we're talking about Double Dragon, and Double Dragon was a fun game, but we're going strictly soundtrack. It did have some memorable tracks, and you could access most of them in B mode, which is like you versus one other opponent, either computer controlled or the second player. I think it was the NES's first considered fighting game, like one-on-one fighting game, unless you count, was it Karate Champ?
I don't think we want to count that game. It's too awful.
Let's not.
Yeah,
let's not go there.
Leave that.
Yeah, leave that to the junk pile of Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Oh no.
Yeah, we're not going back there.
That was like one of our very, very first.
That was the very first.
Yeah. Talking about the ET.
Yeah, no Atari games have made it to this list. Oh yeah, actually that brings up an interesting point. Like, to research this, what was the very first game that had music? Like, not just a little jingle, like had Donkey Kong had the little jingle right before the level started. What game had music playing while you were in the level?
I mean, Donkey Kong did that too, but the first game was Rally X by Namco.
Yes. We researched it, and apparently while you're playing Rally X, there was music playing the entire time. Wasn't it followed, I think, was it Tapper?
Yes, Tapper did have music during the game.
Well,
also, still our local barcade.
Yes.
Don't talk to me about Tapper.
Uh-oh.
No. I can't tell you how many of my quarters that thing is eaten.
Yeah, you gotta get practice at it. I have it for the GameCube. They have that arcade collection. So you can just replay Tapper all night. It's Root Beer Tapper. Like, they lost the Budweiser license, obviously.
Yeah. But it's fun. I mean, it is a fun game, though.
You want to hear something ironic, actually? That game has a Budweiser license, and the local barcade does not serve Budweiser whatsoever. It's strictly craft beers and stuff, but you have a big Budweiser logo, you're playing that, you might have an out-of-towner. Not me, you have an out-of-towner. It's like, hey, I'm going to go to the bar, get a Bud. Hey, can I get a Bud? And, the bartender's like, oh, you don't serve that here. More complete with voices. Thank you.
Funny enough, in Europe, they have a completely different Budweiser, which is called, I think,
Czech Var here. Yes. I've had it. It's really delicious. I've had it in Germany. But yeah, we're talking beer. We should be talking Double Dragon. And yes, Double Dragon for the NES was a great game. It may not have aged well. Let's put it that way. So a kid picking it up today is going to hate it. But you know what? I'm still going to be playing through it again and again and again. Because even though it was surpassed in every way by Double Dragon 2 support for the NES, I still think Double Dragon 1 is way better than that shitfest known as Part 3.
Yeah, I think that's something we can all agree on.
Yes. Actually, speaking of cute fighters, why don't we go to River City Ransom? Did you all have River City Ransom on your list?
I did not.
You know what? I can see the reason why I could see it being so low on my list here. It had the music that was present in that game was phenomenal. However, it was only one central theme. It was basically that level theme. You had the boss theme, and then once you reached the high school where the final level, then you had a different theme. But otherwise, it was the same throughout the entire game, which that kind of brings it a lot lower. It was still it was one of the most addicting games for the NES, and of course the soundtrack. You definitely didn't want to turn it down and turn up anything else. It was a fun game. It was a little different in Japan, obviously, but again, we're strictly North America. And of course, it had that wonderful spoiler from Double Dragon that you'll hear if you play through it long enough.
Yeah, if you haven't played it, I think I recommend that you should.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's fun.
Alright, so let's talk about LJN, because number 10 on my list was actually Nightmare on Elm Street. Even though LJN had mediocre to bad games, I have to give them credit that a lot of them actually had pretty decent music, and Nightmare on Elm Street was basically no exception.
I'm going to cut you off just real quick before I don't want to interrupt too much of that. However, I hate it when people bash LJN strictly because they've watched a couple episodes of The Angry Video Game Nerd, and he's bashed it numerous times. LJN designed some halfway decent games. The few that were borderline awful wound up borderline awful because of really shitty controls. Honestly, if you gave some halfway decent controls to some of these games, they would have turned out halfway decent.
Nightmare on Elm Street was actually one of the best LJN games, gameplay-wise as well. The soundtrack, I would say, definitely helped the game because the music was very intricate. Like I said, no exception as far as LJN games go, and I would argue that it's sort of a good, early horror soundtrack, even though survival horror games didn't really exist until, Super NES at the very least.
You kind of had, Friday the 13th, which we're not really going to go into, but that was, basically the entire game you were spent being chased by zombies. Which I don't know why zombies were in a Friday the 13th game, because they had nothing to do with the story, but we'll save our Friday the 13th hate for another day.
I put it pretty low on my list because there are a few repetitive tracks, especially the boss theme. But yeah, it does sort of build tension, put you in the right mood for fighting Freddy Krueger.
Another one of those Halloween games that.
Oh yeah, we should probably put on our queue for Halloween.
Yeah, once. Because they say.
Obviously, I do want to dive right back into Splatterhouse because Splatterhouse 2 is not something we played, actually.
No, we haven't. I think we should.
Yeah, we should bust into some Splatterhouse 2 around Halloween. So you got stuff to look forward to in a couple of months.
Yeah.
We'll be around. Don't worry. We lasted 2 years. We're gonna last 2 more.
Unless I finally decide to kill these two.
Yeah, in which case it'll just be the Nikki Hour podcast.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no,
No.
no.
Yeah,
at least wait until the fiesta's over.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm not playing Mega Man on my own. There's no one who wants to see that. Speaking of which...
Oh man, I wanted to save this one.
Yeah, we are. No, we are going to
to
save it. You know what? We are going to save it because I'm going to talk about another song. Yeah, we'll save the Mega Man part.
Yeah, because the people listening already know what I think most of us had in our top spot. We'll save it.
Save it. Mm-hmm. But the one I wanted to talk about is probably a song that you're kind of familiar with if you've played Super Smash Brothers. It is Fire Emblem. And yeah, it's a series I've been getting myself into for a little while. I remember when Fates came out and my friends were asking me, "Oh, did you play Fire Emblem?" And the first thing I saw was like purple-haired, big titty woman coming up to me with her arms out. I'm like, this is a waifu simulator right now, so I don't play any of those current Fire Emblem games. We're going way back, like back when it was a medieval fighter. Like,
I'm gonna go piss off Fire Emblem fans right now.
God.
Shining Force did it better.
Oh, I'm sure they did. Yeah. I'm sure you're not pissing me off by saying it's a waifu simulator now. That's all
I might not be pissing you off, but there's a lot of people listening to the 240p Club that are probably like grinding their gears right now. They're grinding their teeth, cracking their knuckles. They're about to write me an angry letter.
Waifu! They took my petting waifu game out. Listen, if you are so upset about a petting waifu game, just as you're upset about how Dead or Alive 6 took out the jiggle titties, you need to get yourself a girlfriend. That's all. I'm just gonna be real with this.
Speaking of girlfriends, the next entry in our list is a relationship between two guys and two guns. I'm talking, of course, about Contra.
Yay!
Contra, the arcade game, was definitely a quarter eater. Contra for the NES was definitely a controller eater because the good players could really best the first 2 or 3 levels without dying so much. After that, you wanted to punch your controller halfway across the block.
Which is, it's a good thing that people didn't because these controllers are kind of expensive.
Well, no, the NES controllers were just a bit expensive. However, they were a lot more durable as the fact that my controller has survived numerous spikings from Ninja Gaiden deaths, like getting knocked into a pit by an eagle numerous times, get you a little angry, and get you to spike your controller like a football onto your whatever floor you're playing on.
Yeah, I'm gonna run away because if I see controllers flying at me, yeah.
Well, no, I'm not throwing it at anyone in particular. I'm throwing it at the floor. Like, ah!
Well, what if it bounces back and hits me in the face?
No, it's more likely going to hit me in the face.
Well, you're a lot taller than me, so...
Well, no, it probably just hit me in the stomach or worse.
Then it bounces off your stomach and hits me in the face.
Okay, maybe that. But the half the momentum will be absorbed by my tummy. And then by the time it whacks you in the face, you'll just be like, ow! But you won't fall unconscious, nothing like that. There'll be no violence.
No, I'll probably just have another bloody nose again.
Oh, God.
I've had like 4 of them in the past couple days.
What the fuck are you doing to your nose?
I have to lay off the crack.
Yeah, ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. No, it's probably just been the dry air in my house.
I used to get them, so I understand.
Yeah. It's an allergy.
Anyway, we're talking about soundtracks, and Contra had a pretty bitchin' soundtrack. Actually, Operation C had one of the better soundtracks for Game Boy, so I'm going to lump them in there. Operation C was good, Contra was good, and Super C had a decent soundtrack, too. Honestly, I don't remember the Super C soundtrack as much as Contra, because, honestly, I've spent a lot more time grinding through Contra than I did Super C.
I just remember one thing about Contra, and that I'm not very good at it. So, but, I mean, we could say that about a lot of games.
It was a very simple soundtrack. It got you pumped to play through the rest of the game, if you could make it.
Dude, that Energy Zone soundtrack, man. That got me extremely pumped. That got me so pumped. Like, yeah, I want to just charge him with my gun, and then zap, you die.
Yeah, but that's my mentality, though, with, like, a lot of games. Like, if you've seen me play Metal Gear, the whole idea is stealth, but
Are we talking the original Metal Gear? Because, well, that didn't make our list of good soundtracks, but you know what?
It kind of made my list, actually.
Metal Gear?
Yeah.
The original?
Yeah.
What did you like about that soundtrack? I'm giving you the floor now. I want to hear this one.
Because it scared the shit out of me whenever the enemies would find me. I'm trying to sneak around because, you know, that's how you play. And all of a sudden, it's like, it makes that alert noise.
The alert noise and the music.
Yeah, I'm like, no! No!
If NES soundtracks were meant to just be effective like that, then I think Metal Gear has the market cornered there.
Yeah, that's really what I was going for.
It was either 88 or 89 that game was released.
Yeah.
I just remember it was a bad translation, but it was a really good game.
Honestly, that's really what I have it on there for.
The truck had started to move.
Well, that's Kojima for you. Kojima's just...
Oh, he did a good job with the translation of Snatcher.
Yeah, I'm not saying he doesn't do a good translation. I'm saying he's so crazy and everything is canon in Metal Gear lore. It's like anything goes.
Well, yeah, I'm just talking about the original Metal Gear. I don't want to talk about Kojima's meltdown and Konami's meltdown and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, no, we don't... Yeah, we're good.
So, okay, Metal Gear made your list because of that scary as shit music.
Yeah, because I'm doing the stage pretty well, then all of a sudden, whoops.
Yep. Ray, do you have any scary as shit musics aside from, I know you mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street, that really got your heart pumping in these games because it might not have been necessarily good, but it just came out of nowhere?
Well, this wasn't on my list, but I think Wizards and Warriors had a pretty tense soundtrack as well.
Yeah, it did. That's a good one, man. That's a good addition to our list here.
Especially, there was a certain area where, like, the music would start up really quiet and just build up to this, like, oppressive, like, atmosphere sort of thing.
Nice. Yeah, those are always the best, like, when they just pop up out of nowhere, you know?
Mm-hmm. Another kind of, like, pop-up music. I was also mentioning earlier the Fire Emblem theme, which is really cool because when you run into people, as you're going through the different levels... Like, I know a lot of these characters through the mobile game, Fire Emblem Heroes, so if I see what they look like, I know already that they're an ally. However, there's some people that I've come across in the villages where they'll attack me, even though I know that they're my allies, but they're...
See, I'm obsessed with, like, details and stuff, so for something like this, I'd have to have a walkthrough. And it's like, I try not to play many games with walkthroughs. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I put the walkthrough away for most titles. But for something like that, it's like, okay, I really need one.
Yeah, I have the walkthrough out because it's like certain characters talk to certain characters to unlock them. Like right now, I'm going through Shadow Dragon on the DS. And the only way that you can get Minerva on your side is if you rescue her sister first. But you need to do it in a limited time, because otherwise she'll come and attack you.
Oh, shit.
So it's like, when the actual title of the song is Together We Ride.
Yeah.
But it's been called so many different things, that people even just call it, like, Encounter theme, people just call it Fire Emblem theme, because it's been used as the Hyrule Castle theme for Super Smash Bros. Melee if you press, like, a certain combination of buttons. And that was kind of like the first real intro to Fire Emblem in America when they added Marth and Roy to Melee.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, so that was where I recognized the song from. And then when I started playing Shadow Dragon and then the Encounter song came up, I was like, what's going on? And then I got an ally, so I said, oh, this is great.
Nice.
So now it's kind of like every time that song comes up when I meet someone, I'm like, I just recruited someone! Woohoo! Only to lose them the next stage. So, I mean, there's so many people, so many characters in this game, and they don't really have personalities, but
here's the thing, like,
you can attach them anyway.
And that's the makings of a good game. You want to keep playing it, like, over and over again for stuff you missed. Mm-hmm. Of course, you also... A good mark of a good game is you want to play it over and over again to get to a certain level where you're hearing the stage music and going, oh my god, that's awesome.
Yeah, but it's like, whoops.
I'm going to switch gears entirely. We're going to go from the worlds of Fire Emblem and Wizards of Warriors to suburban America, circa 1989, 1990. I am talking about Electronic Arts' first game in the United States on a console. That would be, of course, Skater Die 2. Search for Double Trouble. The thing with this game, the thing I loved about this game is the fact that it was one of those American-made games, so they didn't have to worry about a translation. The storyline is so goofy. It's basically, you're in bumblefuck suburbia. You're a skateboarder. You have a girlfriend who's also a skateboarder. You get picked on by a bully who's also a skateboarder, who happens to be the final boss. And eventually you wind up running over the mayor's dog. I'm sorry, the mayor's wife's dog. And then she tells her mayor husband to ban skateboarding, etc., etc. So your ramp gets shut down, and basically the entirety of the game is to raise enough money to get a permit, and then to build a ramp, and then you got to find the plans to the ramp. Like, that's one of the stages, and then finally you got the permit. However, the bully character kidnaps your girlfriend, locks her in a warehouse, and you have to go rescue her and then find the permit, and you get the happy ending. It's a goofy game. It had 4 levels plus a skateboard level like the original Skater Die did. It was the first time I ever heard the word poser. Because the bully calls the hero a poser in the game, and it's like, oh my god, what the fuck's a poser? Then you kind of get more into the heavy metal culture, and you get it. So, but otherwise, you have that, you have, the goofy storyline is suburban America, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? It started off with actual digitized voice samples. You had one of the programs going, skate or die, and then they mixed it, and then they have like what sounds like a heavy metal guitar inside in the background. It's like total, it opens up like total thrash metal, except the drums, because the NES sound trip was extremely limited. But it was just like all heavy metal.
It was really cool.
It was rocking that soundtrack. Like most of the rest of the game is kind of iffy. It was just standard NES fare as far as like soundtracks go. But it was released that summer along with Castlevania 3, Mega Man 3 came out around that time. All these games that were, basically upper echelon NES titles around that summer of 1990. That made you play over and over and over and over again. But the title screen itself warranted this game to be on my list. It was ingrained in my head. I can still hum along to it. Ironically enough, years later, there's a one-person black metal band called Leviathan. A guy named Rest is W-R-E-S-T. He's the guy basically behind Leviathan. Also, if you look at the Skater Die 2 cover art in North America, he's the guy on the skateboard. You did not know that because it obviously wasn't credited, but they found out in an interview years later. So one of the crazy, really depressive black metal bands that I listened to, turns out has a link to this game, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always awesome when you've been playing the game for so long, but then you learn this new little tidbit about it. Oh
yeah, that's the best feeling. Yeah. That makes you want to just play it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're talking about suburban America, how about we talk about suburban America from the Japanese perspective?
I think I know where you're going with this, Ray, and
yeah,
I'd like the cut of your jib.
Because I've ranted about this series several times here on 240p Club. Let's talk about Earthbound Beginnings.
Let's.
Yeah, now this game was actually originally going to be released in North America in 1990 for the NES, but for some reason they pulled the plug on it, and the sequel, Mother 2, was the one that got released here as Earthbound. Now, this was a really tough choice for me to make because I wanted to put one RPG on my top 10, and it was a toss-up between either this or Dragon Warrior 3 and 4. The reason I went with this is because it came out near the end of the Famicom's lifespan, I think. It pretty much pushes the sound chip to its limits, and the tunes are just so memorable. And yeah, it's easy to see why a lot of them were upgraded for Mother 2.
Now, have you played this on the Famicom version, or have you just played the translated version? And is there a difference between the sound effects?
There's no difference between the sound by translated version. I played this like on an emulator way before it was officially released, because that was the only way to play it in English at the time.
Yeah, it's one of those like titles that I know was never released for. It's one of those titles that was never released in North America,
even though it was going to be.
Yeah, another game like that was actually Terra Enigma, which I've talked about before, but that's a different podcast, Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, some of these RPGs that never made it here desperately needed to make it here. However, thanks to the internet gaming community and some hard work from some awesome individuals, we're able to play games like this over here.
I'm still waiting for Fire Emblem 3 to come over here.
In the situation of this game in particular, it was weird because this translation actually came from a prototype. Like, they had actually translated it completely, but pulled the plug at the last minute.
Didn't this come out around the same time Star Tropics came out?
It came out around the same time the Super NES launched, I think.
That might be why. I think Nintendo's kind of like pulling their resources on the SNES, which, left the NES in the dust. Because I can't really think of too many NES Nintendo-led titles past like when the Super NES came out. The only ones I could think of are all puzzle games.
I think there was Dragon Warrior 4. Again, I said it almost made it to the spot. You had a couple Mega Man games, which we'll get to later. And,
yeah, these are all third-party titles, although 6 was published by Nintendo itself. But yeah, these are all, like, third-party titles.
Oh, so you mean just the first party?
Yeah, like, and Nintendo itself. Like, the only games I could think of that Nintendo released for the system here in North America after the SNES came out were all puzzle games. And Star Tropics 2, which got a release, but honestly, isn't well known because of when it was released.
Right.
But yeah, no, I can understand. That's probably why Mother didn't wind up here, or, Earthbound Beginnings, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so getting back to the music, it was like pretty big part of the game. Over in Japan, they had like this whole karaoke song you would sing to the 8 melodies. I think it's a bigger deal over there. Even like in Earthbound, the sequel, I think Shigesato Itoi himself suggested that they play the game with the volume turned all the way up because that's how he envisioned the music.
Yeah, picture it on a big screen, stereo system.
Yeah, that's definitely how I like to hear my music.
Although, we're going to interrupt for a second, change the topic just a bit. We're going to go back to some of our favorite soundtracks, but there are maybe, we'll say a small handful of games on the system that instead you wanted to hook it up to a big screen, a big stereo system. These are titles you wanted to turn the sounds way down and crank whatever music you wanted to while the game was on mute because the soundtrack was just that unbearable.
Rocky and Bullwinkle for NES. Assuming you can make it that far in the game, or since I heard this one isn't too terrible, how about Mega Man 2 for Game Boy?
The soundtrack was kind of iffy. What was the problem with that game was? It was too easy. Capcom ported these out third party, all the Mega Man for Game Boy titles, and they used one company for the first Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge, and the second one they ported to a different company that didn't really quite grasp the Mega Man concept. So, it was laid out for Capcom, etc., but the game itself was just way too easy. To give you an idea, I've beaten it on my first shot. So, Capcom went back to the Mega Man designers, the Mega Man Wily Wars, not the Wily Wars, the Dr. Wily's Revenge. They went to that company back for 3, 4, and 5. So, they were outsourced, but, by the time 3 rolled around, they were using the official musics, the Capcom musics, just ported to Game Boy. 2 was its own exception. They had like an original soundtrack, and it wasn't that good.
So let's hear some of your suggestions for games where you just hit the mute button.
Be honest, this is going to be blasphemy. Legend of Zelda. The first time I played through it, that music's iconic. Everyone knows the Zelda theme, etc., the dungeon theme, and Ganon's theme. However, after many, many playthroughs of that game, I still do one maybe once a year, but I'll have the sound cranked way down and something else playing, because that music is ridiculously repetitive.
Yeah, that would probably be the only reason I would.
Yeah, I mean, granted, it's iconic. I'm not going to insult it. It's one of the most iconic themes in video gaming history. Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't need to hear it on loop constantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very hard for me to listen to songs that are so long that just keep like constant loop and everything. I feel sometimes maybe I just don't have the
well, not many people have the patience.
Yeah. Or the patience, yeah.
A lot of like kids these days, a lot of adults, it's just a generational thing. They'll play certain songs on loop because they like the song so much. They'll play it again and again and again. Yeah, I'm not one of those people.
No.
How about we flip it around and talk about games where we just want to listen to the music and not even bother with the stupid game?
Oh man, up until a couple of years ago, I would have said Blaster Master because the first level's music was so fantastic in that game. But yet, after playing through it, it's just I got really frustrated with it. I thought it was boring. But this is dumbass me. Because years later, I got a copy of it. Years later, talking now I'm in my 20s at this point, which was a little over a decade ago. I finally gave this game a few more chances, and I loved the shit out of it. But, back when I was a kid, I just wanted to play the game itself. I didn't want to play just the first level, but I wanted to hear the music of the first level going on and on and on.
Well, on that note, I think it's finally time to give praise to the Fallen Brothers, Tim and Jeff. They mostly made music for very mediocre games like Silver Surfer, Treasure Master, Terminator 2 for NES, which were absolutely phenomenal music-wise. These are like songs that you would not even want to play the game. You would just want to listen to the songs.
In the case of Silver Surfer, that I definitely did not want to play that game. I just wanted to hear the musics.
Oh, they made music for a lot more games as well. I think maybe one or two decent games. I don't know if Solstice was one of them or not. They're actually much more well-known in the Commodore 64 realm. They made like a whole lot of good soundtracks for that. Like, I think, what was it, Ghouls and Ghosts or something? But since we're in America, we're not really intimately familiar with Commodore 64. It's a lot bigger in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, my cousin had a Commodore 64, so I was pretty familiar with it. But, I could see most kids in North America weren't all that familiar with it. And plus, I don't know, this is just me personally. Again, like I've mentioned like a couple podcasts ago, I grew up in a poor neighborhood. It was all working class, people owned houses, but at the same time, I didn't own a mansion. I had a 2-level row home. So money was tight, and money was not coming in, for some expensive shit. So as far as like my computer experience goes, I didn't get a computer until it was absolutely necessary, and by then Windows 95 was released. So that tells you when I entered the computer realm. However, I did keep some tabs on it. My cousin had a Commodore. I know nowadays that, you had the Atari, they had an Atari 400, the Atari 800, the Amiga, Tandy had a computer line.
Nowadays, given the fact that a lot of games were ports and the atrocious load times, I don't think I would want to play a Commodore 64 nowadays.
Oh yeah, the load times are ridiculous. Like it took, my cousins had Commando on their computer in their Commodore 64. It was a decent arcade port, but again, it took like 5 minutes for it to load. Although, for nostalgia's sake, I wouldn't mind. Like, if you played Grand Theft Auto Vice City and you sat through the intros, like, one of the intros was them loading the game on a Commodore 64.
Yeah, so, getting back to the Fallen Brothers, definitely look them up. Look up Tim Fallen at the very least. I had Silver Surfer on my top 10 because it was probably the soundtrack they made that best fit the atmosphere of the game. Like, a lot of them, I think they just did whatever, and they just tacked it on because the game was so awful anyway.
I do want to throw this out there, too. The recent Marvel movies, I think, gave a perspective to kids these days about all the Marvel characters that we absolutely didn't have, because we didn't have that reference. We had the comic books, and, you know, I was a nerd. I read comic books. Never really got into Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer, but I know the mythos behind it and everything, and, you know, it did fit the Silver Surfer dramatically. Plus, the Joe Satriani album, Surfing with the Alien, was all about him, so that could relate.
Yeah, I think my leeway into these comic heroes were through the Fox cartoons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, the soundtrack for that game was really fantastic. Mm-hmm. I can't really think of another superhero game. Actually, I can think of another superhero game that had an equally as awesome soundtrack as Silver Surfer. That would be Batman.
Yes.
For the NES, created by Sunsoft. The very first Batman game. It was based off the Tim Burton movie of 1989. It was a great game. You know what? I'm going to flat out say it was one of the best superhero games released for the NES. Everything else kind of tried and failed. Superman was passable. I know it gets a lot of flack, but I liked it. I didn't love it. You know, I can play through it.
It's not as bad as 64.
Oh, no, forget that. But no, Batman had the superhero market cornered. You know, it was just a fantastic game. The controls were really responsive. It kind of played like a Mega Man game almost. You know, like, not quite, but close to it. It felt like a Mega Man game with Batman characters. I mean, there's nothing licensed except for Batman and the Joker. You fight the Joker at the end. Otherwise, one of the levels is the Axis Chemical Factory, which is in, you know, the Tim Burton movie, so... The soundtrack was phenomenal. Like, I love the soundtrack, the Batman soundtrack. And the best part is, it continued to play when you paused the game. So, if you really wanted to hear this level music, you just pause the game. It goes on. Like it was, you know, like you never paused it. It was great. This was an awesome title for NES.
And I just remembered a weird, question. I think someone asked, a Nick Arcade or something. I don't remember exactly where. Someone asked how to get 10 points in Batman for NES.
10 points?
Yeah, 10 points. The weakest enemy you can kill gives 100. Yeah. I don't know. It's just one of those weird questions you hear.
Here's something I think might be related to that question. Someone did the math, and I believe it was Super Street Fighter 2, one of the home versions of Super Street Fighter 2. They figured out one of the high scores was not mathematically possible. So, using math, and Capcom wouldn't respond to them, so they figured it out that it's probably a false score, meant to just drive gamers nuts. I have a feeling seeing a score of 10 in Batman, you might have seen a screenshot or something, may have elicited some similar response. Like, how do you get 10 points in Batman?
Yeah, I think now looking back at it, now that we have access to the actual data that these games store, as we're playing them, the 2 zeros at the end are pretty much just for show. The score starts at 100.
Like pinball, the first thing you do in pinball is gain 10,000 points.
It sounds pretty similar to the Todd Rogers thing we were talking about a couple podcasts ago, actually.
Oh yeah.
How his high score for Dragster was proven impossible by data
modern
miners.
Technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there. Alright, why don't we move on? We're covering most of our list. Ray, I haven't heard from you in a while as far as an entry. I know you talked about Mother, but what else do you have to add to this before we just go on and gush about our favorite Mega Man levels?
Before we dig into Capcom, how about we dig into Rare for a bit? Snake, Rattle, and Roll was on my top 10.
I've actually never played Snake, Rattle, and Roll, although I've heard of it. I've never actually played it.
It's like an isometric action game, sort of. I think the goal of each level is you have to like eat enemies to get your tail to a certain length, and then when you reach the goal, if your tail is long enough, the exit will open for you, and you move on to the next level.
So basically, it's a prehistoric snake.
Something like that. I mean, it's like every level is like sort of a checkerboard, and you have to eat like these orbs, I think. Well, as far as the soundtrack goes, it was very like stylized, like 50s rock and roll, blues and stuff, and I thought it was a very, very well made and underrated soundtrack. Yeah, it ends up fitting the game very well, oddly enough, and it's something you could definitely listen to without actually playing the game.
Nice.
And get the same experience, so...
I think one more I'd also like to bring up is a familiar sound in Ninja Gaiden. As we were talking about Ninja Gaiden earlier.
We were mentioning Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah.
Ninja Gaiden is one of the hardest NES titles I've ever played.
Oh boy, yeah. So hence why the song is...
In-house right now, we have our current 240p Club speedrun champion of Ninja Gaiden.
We do.
Or maybe the only one who's beaten it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are the only one who's beaten the first Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah. We'll get there. Hence why the song is called Ryu's Determination. Or, well, there's different titles of it, but the general...
Are you talking about level 4? Yep,
Yeah.
the cave music in level 4.
Yeah.
Which actually they recycled into a higher end boss theme.
Yeah,
They used to play when you were facing. I forgive me, my French is horrible. The main bad guy, I believe, is pronounced Jacques.
Jacques. I think it's just Jacques.
Jacquio.
Jacques.
It was a weird like spelling of a... I forget how it was spelled.
I know
that's basically how his name was spelled in Japanese.
Jacquio, but in French it's...
I always wanted to pronounce it Hakio. I thought it was like Hispanic.
I pronounced it Jacquio, which, my French knowledge was non-existent. I didn't grow up in Canada. I don't know French. I learned, picked up a few things. So I figured it was Jacques because they always cut off the last letter, while pronouncing it. So, like, that's why if you see anything in English, like borrowed from French, that has an X at the end, they cut off the X. Mm-hmm. Like, one of Nikki's favorite hockey players is Claude Giroux. Mm-hmm. It's spelled Giroux. They don't pronounce the X. He's not Giroux. Or however,
Giroux, yeah.
Yeah, so, French, same thing. French is a weird language. I apologize for offending the French.
I mean, I think it's a nice language. It's just hard for me.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible for me. I'm an English speaker. I barely speak Spanish. So it was really tough for me to adapt to French. Even though, Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Catalan, and Portuguese are all, in the same family, but forget it. I know a few French phrases. Thanks to the World Cup now, finally, I know a few
exactly.
Spanish phrases, but no, but yeah, let's talk about the music. That music was fantastic. That was one of the best musics in the game. Definitely. And unfortunately, I didn't hear that for years because the farthest I ever got in the game was level 3. Mm-hmm. For the longest time, like when I was a kid, I could only get to level 3. The Eagles just knocked me right in the pits, and it's terrible.
Well, you hear it a lot because it's been reused as the theme of Ryu Hayabusa now at this point.
I had a lot of trouble with the level 3 boss as a kid. Nowadays, looking back, it's not that tough of a boss, so...
It was one of the easier bosses in that game, especially considering if you beat the level 2 boss, which used to give me problems as well.
I think, the first time I actually ever heard it was while I was playing Warriors Orochi 3, and when that was used as Hayabusa's theme, when I got myself into a bad situation in one of the stages, and Hayabusa just showed up and saved me, so...
Oh, nice.
Yeah, until I realized, okay, since he's been in Warriors Orochi, he's been in every Dead or Alive. He has been in just about every collaboration that Koei makes. He's been in Dynasty Warriors 3 times, and it's like, at this point, I'm just sick of looking at him.
I'm thinking more because...
I like Hayabusa,
I'm thinking they, in canon-wise, just talking story, they've used the Xbox and PlayStation Hayabusa versus the NES Hayabusa.
Yeah, they use the...
I think that was just a reimagining anyway. Like, they turned it into, like, a Shinobi game, basically. Mm-hmm. which is cool, but, it's still just as hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind playing as Hayabusa, but it's kind of like Ninja Gaiden now is a rated M game. When you throw him into like a Warriors game where it's rated T, it kind of downgrades him a little bit.
Yeah, well, they didn't have video game ratings back when we were kids.
Well,
but,
of course, yeah. I mean, it's different.
For the NES, that would be TV Y7 or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
You don't see blood. You see the enemies disintegrate when you hit them. So
right.
you think there's some, evil spirits or something instead of actual enemies, which I think they are because of the respawn rate. Because you could basically be sitting in a certain spot, keep killing an enemy over and over and over again until you advance forward. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to get into
we're
that
not.
rage-inducing...
We're not going to get into that whole rage thing, yeah.
Oh, one game I forgot to mention, actually, that deserves some praise for their soundtrack, Journey to Silius. It's another Sunsoft game. We mentioned Blaster Master. We mentioned Batman. We have to mention this one. Journey to Silius was a great game. The music was upbeat. You just felt like running through the level after hearing this music. It's a hard game. It's, again, one of those games that's kind of similar to Contra, but it's, really cutesy, instead of, the Contra, tough graphics, It was just really cutesy. Same thing. Basically, the hero had to go to some, space colony. And
isn't the rumor that they were actually making that to be a Terminator game, but they couldn't get the license?
I did not hear that rumor. I could totally see it, though, because if you look at the backgrounds and all the graphics, it looks like it could be a Terminator game. Especially the first boss is like a helicopter battle, and instead of what actually pops out, I could totally see them popping out was it the T-1000? Not the T-1000, the skeletons. Mm-hmm. I could totally see that. So, it makes sense. And the character does kind of look like Kyle a bit. So, yeah, in a way, yeah, you can definitely see that.
The Terminator game we actually got. Oh, God.
Yeah. Although the arcade game was halfway decent. Well, that was T2.
I already talked about, Terminator 2 for NES in the Tim Fallon category, so definitely give that soundtrack a listen.
But don't play the game.
The game is mediocre at best.
Another game I forgot. I'm going to bring myself into the RPG realm. Phantasy Star for the Sega Master System is still one of my favorite 8-bit RPGs. It had a decent soundtrack. Some of the dungeon themes were still memorable. They've remastered it since on Phantasy Star 4, the two main big dungeon themes, which were done way better on 16-bit, obviously, but still, the original, it sounded really good.
Much like with Castlevania 3, they also had a special sound chip in Japan that we didn't get here in America. Or, in Brazil, which, Master System games are really popular over there. They're still bootleg to this day, I think.
Brazil was one of the Master System capitals. That was the one where that system was selling the most. That and the Genesis. Sega had a foothold in Brazil. Europe, they did pretty well, too. Japan, I think they were second, I believe, to the TurboGrafx or the PC Engine.
No, Famicom pretty much completely dominated over there. Remember, you have to keep in mind, this is where Dragon Quest games, they had to make it illegal to sell it on a certain day.
Oh, so yeah. Well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But didn't, I know the TurboGrafx, or aka the PC Engine, did a lot better out there than it did here.
I know that for sure. I think so.
Actually, they were making games for that for years after they stopped in the U.S.
Yeah, they got the Castlevania 5 that we only sort of got.
Oh yeah, the remaster, which is not even worth mentioning. So, okay, actually, speaking of what's worth mentioning, I know I just barely touched on Phantasy Star, good soundtrack. Obviously, you should play through it because the game warrants it. Did we forget anything else before we go into the Blue Bomber?
How about we dig into Game Boy? Does anyone have any suggestions from Game Boy before I go into what I think is, the only one worth talking about?
No, we did mention Mega Man for Game Boy, which is a separate, series. If we're going to talk about Game Boy titles, Mega Man 5 had completely different bosses based on the planets of the solar system. So, I do have to mention 5 as a unique soundtrack, and it was pretty good. Kirby's Dream Land had a decent, cutesy soundtrack. Kirby's Dream Land 2, more of the same. And obviously everyone knows the Pokemon titles.
Yeah, I was going to give that honorable mention, but yeah, honestly, I really don't like the Game Boy sound chip as much as I do the NES.
Oh, yeah, it was made for...
with the exception of Link's Awakening.
Link's Awakening was an awesome title. It was, if anyone didn't know, it wasn't based off, but it was inspired by Twin Peaks and the X-Files. Although, no, actually just Twin Peaks, because the X-Files wasn't around back then.
Mm-hmm.
So
we've gone into this game before. It's Legend of Zelda. Yeah, it was probably the most like ambitious and lengthy Legend of Zelda soundtrack to date. Like, it's the first installment where like every dungeon had their own theme instead of just like one or two themes for every dungeon. And a lot of the overworld segments also had like different themes, and they sounded really good on the Game Boy chip. Like, they really knew how to put it to good use.
I'd like to play it again whenever I get a chance.
It's still one of my favorite Zelda games.
Definitely.
I'd like to throw out a random honorable mention on Game Boy as well to a title called Quarth. It's a puzzle game by Konami, which they did release an NES version in Japan, but we never saw that. We just saw it for Game Boy. But it had, what limited music it did have, again, this is a puzzler, the music was very good. So as far as like Game Boy titles, I give that one like a pat on the back. Also, Wario Land was really good, soundtrack-wise. But that's all I could think of on the Game Boy, because the Game Boy was more portable than, basically meant to be like an art... Like, the sound was meant to be not arcade quality, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, Mega Man?
Mega Man.
Okay, everyone...
Rockman,
yes. Everyone that has tuned into this podcast has expected us to bring up Mega Man for NES at one point or another when it comes to soundtracks, with very good reason. Mega Man's 1 through 6 had some of the best music in NES history.
I think all of us had two at the top or near the top of our list,
yes.
just because of how influential that game is, how much has been remixed, and just being like the most well-known Mega Man game, I think.
Yeah, and everyone could hum Wily's theme. Like Wily, the first two Wily levels of Mega Man 2, you could hum it. It's glued in your head permanently.
Mm-hmm.
This game, actually, Mega Man 2 was a labor of love from the design teams. They were working on this at night well after business hours because, it was given the green light from Capcom. The original Mega Man did fairly well, but, not enough to basically set off, fireworks back in Capcom Japan. So their programmers were given the chance to make it. Granted, it didn't interfere with any other projects. Infaking, who is now known as the godfather of Mega Man, he was taking on an intern at the time, so he had that going on. He was programming some other things. I believe it was Legendary Wings he was programming, as well as he had to, at nighttime, design this game. So, this was a labor of love. These people really liked what they were doing, and Mega Man 2 was the result of a labor of love instead of just a contractual agreement, and it wound up being one of the best titles in NES history. And the sounds of that game, they took no prisoners whatsoever. It was so memorable. Just because the game was so memorable, I think the soundtrack became memorable. But the Wily levels were legit NES gems.
Absolutely. Like, I have a Spotify mix of all my favorite video game music, and that's like definitely at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And every time I hit shuffle, that's almost always the first song that pops
The
up.
first one is a classic. The second Wily theme from the same game, I would say, is a little bit underwhelming compared to it, but
it worked for the level, because honestly, my memories, that particular Wily theme were that water with the yellow water, which looked disgusting. Like you had to dodge all the spikes, and you died a couple times trying to do it. So that evokes that sort of memory, plus the other level with the level 4 Wily, where you had to destroy the wall mounts with the crash bomber. I didn't know how to do it for years. I figured it out that the walls that you destroyed stayed destroyed. So they recommended the easiest way to do it: destroy absolutely every wall in that, and then die, and then sit there and recharge your weapons while you were, basically killing those. What the enemies are called, pipe tops, I believe.
Yeah, I believe the boss itself was called Boo Beam Trap.
Yeah. So basically, you were sitting there just recharging your weapons, which sometimes took to 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how generous the enemies were with the power-ups. So basically, that theme was playing the entire time, and that's how that glued into my head. However, the Wily 1 theme is glued into my head regardless because it was so good. As far as like the rest of the bosses are concerned, the Clashman or Crashman, depending on what translation you're using, that theme started out good. It got a little repetitive, but it started out good. Heat Man's theme really set the moods. Metal Man's theme was pretty good.
Flashman, I've heard remixes of, which sound excellent.
Yeah. The Mega Man series just got just as good for every subsequent game. Mega Man 3 has some of the best music, I think, in the series overall. And it didn't have the best song, but it had the best music in the series, I think. Mega Man 4 had some really good ones. I still remember the Wily theme, like the Wily level 1 and 2 had some really good music. Which, not Dr. Cossack, like when you beat him and, wound up in Wily's castle. The Wily theme. Mm-hmm. That was really good. And Mega Man 5, the Proto Man theme was excellent. Actually, that whole game's soundtrack was really good. I thought that was, out of the Mega Buster trilogy there, 4, 5, and 6, I think that one was the best. Mm-hmm. Music and gameplay. Yeah, we could gush about Mega Man. X is definitely going to wind up near the top of our 16-bit list, because Mega Man X1 was absolutely some of the best music ever. But we'll get to that once we get to that podcast. However, for this podcast, we're going to cut it right now, call it, because we established Mega Man 2 is the best.
Yeah. I think that's something we can all agree on.
Absolutely. Speaking of Mega Man, we have Mega Man for Mega Pause coming up. If you like animals, and if you don't like animals, I don't know what's wrong with you. But if you like to see some homeless kitties, some homeless doggies, even a couple iguanas, maybe a ferret, wind up with nice homes, donate to these people. These people are fantastic. Paws Philadelphia Animal Welfare Society is what charity we played through last year, and we're going to play again for them this year. Mm-hmm. And we expect all of you to tune in August 4th. It's going to be at 1 o'clock this time instead of noon. We learned, we're going to work out all the bugs before 1 o'clock. Mm-hmm. We'll start the stream sometime like around 12:30. We'll just be hanging out. You could ask us questions. And brand new this year, if you donate a certain amount of money to Pause, you get to handicap one of us. Any way possible. You could pick a game and have us beat like 4 out of 8 of the bosses with the Mega Buster only. You can make us, have to use a certain weapon throughout the entire stage. That's going to be a fun one. Mm-hmm. Mm. And my favorite, if you donate $100, you can just flat out tell us which boss we're fighting next. Mm-hmm. You just go, you're all fighting this boss next. If you donate $100 to Pause. We're at your command, so feel free to bust out the checkbook, send some money. It's all going to animals. They basically spend this money on paper supplies, they spend this money on the upkeep of animals, and pounds upon pounds of pet foods. And medical care, too. They offer low-cost spading and neutering, so, like Bob Barker said, they're helping control the pet population.
Keep your dogs.
Keep your pets spayed or neutered. Mm. So, from all of us to the 240p Club, we sincerely hope you wind up watching us on Twitch, 240pclub.com. will be directly on 240pclub.com. We have all the links there. Twitch.tv/240pclub. YouTube, we have last year's Mega Man for Mega Pause if you want to see me beat everyone here.
Mm-hmm. If you want to see me die a lot.
Nikki die a lot.
If you watched last year, you may remember Joe just barely walloped me because I chose not to practice. This year, I will be practicing.
Excuses.
This year, I will be practicing this year.
I am going to be practicing my ass off, and I look to retain that title this year. We'll see, though. And you'll all see August 4th. Anyway, from all of us at the 240p Club, I am Metallic Joe.
Yo. I'm Nikki.
Yeah, you're not Yo, you're Nikki.
I am Nikki.
I'm Ray, and I will say, while you wait for the Mega Man for Mega Pause, definitely go look up the Fallen Brothers on YouTube, listen to their music. It's amazing.
And also Lagrange Point, which didn't make this list because of that ridiculously good sound chip.
I want to go back to sleep.
Okay. Nikki's going to sleep. We're going to go play Mega Man. Ciao.